Okay, so May is over and it's time for the monthly video critique, theme 13, which was motion blur. I specifically said motion blur instead of slow shutter speed because the goal here was to record the amount of motion blur you wanted for the image you wanted to create, and that may or may not require what would be considered a slow shutter speed. The grading system is the same as always. First consideration is, does it fit the theme? And all images submitted do fit the theme. The second consideration is artistic and aesthetic considerations. Those are personal opinions on my part for the most. And then the last is technical considerations, the shutter speed chosen, lighting, etc., etc. Grading system is A, I wish I had taken that picture, down to D, which means you messed it up somehow technically. And there will be no F's. All right, the first image we have is by Nitin, and we have a 155 millimeter setting on a 7300 millimeter lens, variable aperture, 5.6 is max, 7.1 was used, so it stopped down a little bit for sharpness, pretty high shutter speed, and an ISO of 1600. In looking at the image, we have just a little bit of motion blur, maybe a little fast on the shutter speed for that, but there's several other movements going on. Usually when you have a moving subject, there's not just one direction, particularly something like a running monkey, a horse, or even a motorcycle going down a road. It's going to be moving across, but also vertically, either with bumps or just body movement, and that's what we have here. So we need a higher shutter speed to try to freeze that. Looking at the image, it doesn't look like it's a panning shot. It doesn't look like the camera was in motion because the grass is relatively in sharp, and that's going to require an even higher shutter speed because panning could have helped with the left to right motion of the subject. And it doesn't look really sharp anywhere. And ISO, there's plenty of ISO noise in this, but I wouldn't say it's actually hurting the image. The lack of sharpness is more the issue. And when any time something's in motion, there's usually a point where motion slows down, and you can use a slower shutter speed, or you need a slower shutter speed in order to record that blur. In the case of a monkey or a horse, many animals running, when the legs reach full extension, they're going to slow down because they change direction. So right here, the legs are close to pretty full extension, and therefore they're probably moving slower than they would be mid-swing. So timing-wise, we've caught it at relatively slow point in travel for the legs and arms. So a little earlier would have created more motion blur, and panning could have helped freeze the left to right motion at least. The other option here, I think, and the ideal one, I think, would probably have been an on-camera flash at a reduced power setting. You know, not a speed light. You need a speed light to get the settings you would want, and a power setting, a lower power setting for a higher flash T1 time to freeze motion. Then you could have gotten away with a slower shutter speed for the legs and arms, and then superimposed a brighter frozen image from the flash on top, and that would have helped. For me, this image works well at a small size, but when you look closely, it falls apart. And mostly it's due to sharpness. Panning might have helped. A faster shutter speed would have froze more motion, and so faster shutter speed timed a little differently, so there was more speed in the legs, might have worked. And with something like this, there's a certain amount of luck involved. You have to get the timing just right. They have to do exactly what you want when you want them to do it, and so there's always a bit of luck involved. I like the image. I like the baby. I think it's well framed, well composed, well caught. Just a bit off on sharpness and shutter speed selection or technique using flash or something. I think I think it needs some help. So overall, for me, this image it's in the C range. I see B to even A potential here. Just it needs to pop a little more. It needs to be a little sharper for me. All right, our next image is by Adrian. We have a 17mm lens, ISO 100, stopped way down to f11, already at minimum ISO, so stopping down to get a longer shutter speed, and I have to say it's worked really well here for me. I normally do not like selective color, but in this image it works. Because there's a general rule doesn't mean you shouldn't break it, and this image selective color works for me. I like the amount of blur that you have, but it's not so much that I don't know what's going on. I can't tell. I like just the feel of this image overall. And I guess that's all that really matters. Settings wise and everything, I don't see any issues or things I would have done differently. The selective color works. So nice job. I would put this image as a B, I think. I think this is in the B plus range. It does look to me like there's a bit of lens distortion going on here. That this trolley looks like it's curving around a bend in front of me, and I think it should be straight. I mean, we could correct some of that down here with lens correction, and try this. Actually, I would have to do this in Photoshop because the bend is not across the center, so I'm not going to get rid of all of it. I don't know that I prefer it fixed, to be honest with you. I prefer it across the center. I would have to play with it in Photoshop, but I would look at that, getting rid of some of that field curvature, barrel distortion that's going on here. See if we can, maybe it would look better, maybe it wouldn't, I don't know. Overall, nice job. Next image we have is by Bradley, and we've got 120mm mid-range on a zoom lens there. Stop down, probably close to a stop and a half, 2 stops from what it would be at 120, and ISO 125. I don't know. Seems to me it would be either ISO 100 or 200 as a minimum. I would have to go see what camera that is and perhaps even look up the specs. But the ISO is low, enabling a slower shutter speed. But we still have a 1/640th. And generally, unless it's very fast motion, somewhere around 1/1000th will freeze a lot. We do have nice panning going along, so the background is blurred, keeping the subject stationary in the field of view for sharpness. That's been done pretty well. There's not a lot of background in order to convey that, but there's enough, I think, for me. I'm not sure if I prefer or appreciate this little stripe up here. I would consider cropping that out. Let's take a look at it. It's going to put the subject's head at the 1/3 position instead of where it was down here in the middle. So I actually think it works a little better cropped in a little tighter because there's not enough in the background contributing to the feel. So I think this actually works a little better. Shutter speed's a pretty good choice. I think my general rule of thumb is 1 over subject speed. So this must have been a pretty high speed section of track to get this amount of blur with a 1/640th shutter speed. Got good motion on the wheels and pretty decent focus. And I don't think the issue is focus. I think the issue here is probably a little bit on panning technique. And I'm going to guess that the key here is to pick up the subject as early as possible and follow through. So start panning as early as possible to get that speed synced up with the subject as well as possible. And it usually takes a few tries to get in sync with what you're photographing. So if you work this area for a little while, it would take a few swings. Each one would get a little better synced, and you can work a little lower shutter speeds if you wanted to. But it's in reasonable focus. I don't see any area that's in better focus, so I think it's blur. A little bit of motion blur for not quite being synced up. And way to fix that is show it smaller. If we present this at a smaller size, let's see, we can go down here like 1 to 3. The smaller we make it, the sharper it looks, more depth of field it has, etc., etc. So we could kind of cheat the system and just present this smaller. Overall, I think it's a pretty good job. I think just a little bit of panning technique would be required. Overall, I give this a C plus B minus, in that range. It needs to be sharp, in order to really, hit that A level. Nice job overall. Next image is by M, and we have a 105 millimeter lens, ISO 200, 1.3 seconds at f/18. So it's a fixed focal length, probably a macro. ISO 200, I believe ISO 100 is the minimum for that camera. If so, it could have been ISO 100 and gotten your shutter speed with a lower aperture. There's not anything in here that I think requires that much depth of field, and f/18 is definitely putting you into diffraction limited, so things are not as sharp, as crisp as they could be. f/11 would be about the maximum. Technically, about f/5.6 is when the 24 megapixel APS sensor starts going into diffraction at the sensor. Images, about twice that, f/11 is where it really starts to show up in your images when viewed from appropriate distance, etc., etc. f/6 is going to be your sharpest. f/11 is not going to really significantly impact images. f/18, you're starting to see it in here. So, like I said, ISO 100, lower aperture, I think we would have been good. And if that wasn't enough depth of field, then I would probably have photographed this a little further away to get the depth of field and then cropped for composition in post. Alright, so technical stuff aside, I really like this image. I really do. Shutter speed chosen's great. A few nitnoid things here. It looks to me like this is probably blown and unrecoverable. It looks like recovery was done due to this kind of grayishness of the strawberry here. It looks like highlight recovery to me has affected the image. And there's some little things, sugar flakes, crystals, I guess, stuck places where they're less than ideal. Some of those could be taken out. If we tried to do it here in Lightroom, let's go with heels, see what that does. It may or may not do a good job because the spoon's at a slope, so it's probably not going to do a great job of lining them up. So I'd do that in Photoshop, but the key here, my biggest thing I think I would have done here is taken at least 2 images, at least 2. One of just the strawberry on the spoon before we made a mess, with good lighting for those 2, and then start building up your sugar waterfall. then you can combine images and mask in. So we could have fixed this color issue with the original strawberry image. We could have used multiple images here to build up a level of blur and create levels of blur in different areas that we wanted. Not that I have any problem with the amount that's here, but by combining and building them up, you can perhaps eliminate this blowout area and build this up, and we could have our pristine strawberry and spoon to replace these portions that we might not want. So that was probably the biggest thing, I think. And honestly, it's probably the biggest weakness I have when doing this kind of stuff is always try to get it all right in the camera, one frame. And really, a lot of times, the better answer is to plan on combining things so you get the maximum control and as close to the exact result you want. I don't think there's going to be anything I can recover out of this. Not really. It helps the strawberry a bit. We can do, instead of doing that, let's go use a brush and see what we can do. We'll just touch little areas. That's kind of overkill, isn't it? Yeah, I don't like it so much. I'd rather see it blown out. I think with some finesse, we find that and delete it, and we'll try something else. We'll go with a much bigger brush and a lower flow. Click on that once. See what it's affected. Just building up the flow by clicking on it multiple times. And then we'd have to go in and erase it from the areas we don't want. Certainly we don't want it in that area. But I don't really see it having had a great benefit for us. And we could look at another brush here in this area. See if we can bring, not the highlights, but if we can bring up the saturation. See if we can get that something more out of those reds. It's not working too well. So without playing with it too much, I don't see where I'm going to be able to improve any significantly on this image in Lightroom anyways. And I don't think it needs a lot. Just the biggest thing is plan in advance to make things as easy for you as possible. And sometimes spending time in post getting it right is quicker, easier, and more controlled than getting it right in one shot in camera. So try to keep that in mind. Overall, this image is a solid B for me. It's verging on B plus to A. It has that potential for me. Okay, the next image we have is by Hayward, and we have a 35mm lens. I'm assuming it's a prime. Stop down to f8. ISO 200, which on the D300 is minimum ISO, and stopping down allows the longer shutter speed of 1/5 of a second, and I think that shutter speed was an excellent choice here. It's got just about the right amount of blur, and f8 should not be an issue for the sensor or image as far as that goes. Looking closely, it doesn't look entirely sharp. It looks real close. There might be a little misfocus going on. I'm not sure. Things might not be actually all that sharp in reality. Okay, looking at the image overall, my biggest issue is the uneven lighting. I like the backlighting. I think it should be a little higher for me. I'd like this glow to not start graduating out so low here, a little bit higher. But the unevenness of lighting between the two reels is a pretty big detractor to me, and it's just a little hotter in this area. And we could try to fix it. We could use a radial filter. Drag that out across here. But I don't. Let's see. Let's turn the highlights off. Let's invert that mask. Bring the exposure up a bit. We'll reduce the feather on it. Reduce the feather on it. And maybe shift the temperature over a little bluer. Try to get a little closer match to it. Bump the contrast a little bit. We could try to get it closer, but it's probably not going to look entirely right. A little better. And then we could try to, for the image overall, bring down the highlights. And actually, it's probably going to be whites. Bring the highlights back up. We could try to mess with that a little more. But really, there's no reason for it. It's a still life. Gotta refine it. Even if it involved taking two pictures. You know, if you didn't have light that could light everything evenly, you could light things individually and compile the images to get the results you want. But I just think it was too small a light source down to the right, coming up across, and it just didn't illuminate evenly. If that's an issue, you could try to use like a shower curtain or just a sheet, something like that. Shine your lights through that, and that'll even it out and spread it out. So you get a bigger, more even illumination. That might have helped. Just something with the lighting. Um, Overall, for me, this image is in the C range. You tweak it a lot, but I don't know. It's in the C range. I see B potential. Oh, and the other thing I think there's no reason for is the seam in the corner. I'm willing to bet if you just took the effort, you could have repositioned stuff so that this wasn't there to start with. It'd be easy enough to go in and take out. And I say that and it probably won't work. We'll give it a shot. See what it does. I was afraid it would do that. Gotta get away from that. I have to go to clone. Yeah. It's more work than it's worth in Lightroom here. But it is probably, it would be easy to fix in Photoshop. But the point is, it didn't need to be there to start with. So we're in the C. I see B potential somewhere in that range. And to get really beyond that, I think would require something more dramatic. And how exactly I would go about that, I don't know. But I'd want these illuminated dials to pop more. I'd want more contrast in this area and better lighting overall. to get it to an A range, I think. All right. And our last image is by Nitin. We have a 300 millimeter, so we're max extension. Where's 5.6 wide open. We're stopped down to 9 sharpness. ISO 200, I believe, is max ISO. Minimum ISO to enable a 1/30th of a second shutter speed. And I think it's verging on too much blur. It's an artistic image, and I have no problem with that. Our duck's almost fading out in some areas to where it doesn't exist. And I think so just a little less blur would work a little better. But it's hard to say without actually seeing the composition of the results. If we look at the image, for me, I don't really want it where it is, kind of in the middle. I want the bird somewhere else. Not entirely sure where I want the bird. Maybe probably more like that. It's more what I would want. And in the original image, this white area, to me, it doesn't quite work. Go back and we look at the whole image. Just step back. Go back to the whole image. It kind of looks like a cloud in the sky kind of thing, but it's got a different tone. It's got a different temperature. It's kind of green instead of blue. It's got a different amount of blur to it, or direction of blur to it, and it's lighter than everything else. So to me, it's really more of a distracting area in the image, taking away from the overall feel and temperature and aesthetic that it has otherwise. So cropping that out to me is a good thing, but I'd rather not have had it in there to start with. And you could take this out in Photoshop, possibly in Lightroom. Photoshop would be my choice. You could certainly adjust the temperature of that area alone with the brush and stuff to try to match it better. What the heck? Let's go for it. So I'm just going to brush that area and see what kind of masking we got accomplished. Alright, so it's pretty light. Let's take the temperature, move it a little magenta because it looked green, so go away from green to magenta. We'll go away from yellow to blue. See if we can blend that in a little better temperature wise. That's getting there. And maybe pull that exposure down just a bit. So I think that's kind of what I would do. I think it needs some refinement. It's probably about what I would do with it as taken. So we started here. Oh, it's not going to let me go back to the crop. So we started here and we wound up there. And I like this better personally. Now, I do think the more space and more background, more water would be ideal if it didn't have the white blob area. And I believe it was a water fountain, and including it and getting it blurred was intentional. I just personally don't feel like it really worked with this image. As it is here, this is a personal taste kind of image, and I can see it being an A, solid A image for some people. For me, it's in the B range. But overall, nice job. I think you did well. And I believe that is the last image submitted this month. And so until we meet again next month, I hope you have a great day and a great June.